6. So we're about to meet Judy Rose in the snow. Hi. Hey, Judy.
Hello. Hi,
I'm
Sean.
I'm sitting here with Judith Rose or Judy Rose. I've known her. I think I met her in '96, and she ran a school called Daycare of Roses. And I don't even know how I even connected up with you. I think one of the women that worked here had met me or something.
Yeah, I actually have a picture of her in there.
That's right. And she contacted me and said, "Hey, would you want to come?" Because I just started working in schools as a visiting artist, I call that. And Judy took me on as a visiting artist. And once a week I would come here, and it was kind of interesting because sometimes I don't really have a degree in teaching art or teaching anything except that I've been around art my whole life. And so I have different ideas, and she let me express these ideas with the kids. And sometimes it was storytelling, it was circle time, definitely. Circle time, sometimes I'd bring bamboo sticks and we would lay them out and click on them and play them on the ground and lay them out and I call it the magic ladder, or sometimes I'd bring in musical instruments and show them, or sometimes I'd bring in puppets. And I actually started doing shadow puppets here. And Judy Rose was kind enough to let me do this freestyle teaching. And she never knew what I was going to do. And sometimes I never knew what I was going to do. But I did it, and the kids were mesmerized by it. And the first time I did shadow puppets with them, they were just super quiet and watched it and just totally were absorbed by it. And I found that pretty interesting. And from there, I started a career of doing shadow puppets for 25 years, all over California and Oregon. So thank you, Judy, for letting me do that. And I remember the first time I did it, I got a chair and a broom handle, and I taped the broom handle to the chair leg. And then she had a lamp, and I rolled out a roll of paper that she had and made my first puppet screen. And I cut out these puppets right in front of the kids of a cat and a mouse, and I did the story of cat and mouse and how they were best friends. And that was the first time I did it. And I just remember everyone was just super quiet. And for like 20 minutes, they sat.
3 and 4 year olds.
Yeah, 3 and 4 year olds. And I was like, that's really interesting because most people had no faith in 3 or 4 year olds sitting for that long and kept things moving. But I kept it really slow and steady, and they stayed with me the whole time. So, what inspired you to open up the Daycare of Roses?
Well, I at the time had about an 18-month-old, and I have a teaching credential, and I was going to go and get a teaching job. And before I even applied for any jobs, I went to check out childcare. In I, the places I found, I didn't feel like they were the places I wanted to leave my son, for a whole day. And it's not that people were bad or it was dirty or anything like that. It was just that seemed to be a lot of TVs on. And I didn't want someone sitting my child in front of a TV for any part of the day. And so I started doing some in-home licensed childcare. And as it happened, about the same time I was trying to figure out, now what do I do? I have a little guy. I joined a babysitting co-op. That was where we traded babysitting, a group of people. There are probably a dozen of us, friends and friends of friends. And as it happened, many of the people in the babysitting co-op needed more childcare than they could trade. Mainly the trading was because you wanted to go out, have a date with your husband or whatever. But people also worked and maybe did some other things in the community. And so I suddenly had contact with all these people with small children who needed childcare. So I started out as a family daycare home, and right off back then they usually only gave you a license for 6 when you were first starting out. But because of my background, I had a teaching credential, I had early childhood education, I'd done a lot of that. They gave me a license for 12 kids. And of course I had help doing that, and I started it in my house. And then that gets to be a bit much when you're having your house torn apart every day, because I would take things out and reset it up. On the weekends we would like put our house back together, and then on early Monday morning I'd put things away and set it up for childcare. So a number of years of doing that, and then I decided to build a building right on the same property. And was still a family daycare, but then there were more children in need of childcare, and people said, why don't you do a children's center? You've got room here. And so, okay. So I expanded and became a actually licensed children's center, where I could have up to, I had a preschool program, and eventually I actually had a separate toddler program, and I could have 24 kids in my preschool, and I could have another, I think it was 12 in the toddler center. And at that point, I turned the house that I lived in into the toddler center. I eventually moved out of the house, so I had two. I had a toddler center and a preschool. For about 5 years, I did both of those.
In this place that we're in right now.
This is the preschool building.
Right, and it's kind of semi-empty right now because it's not a school anymore. When did you stop doing the Daycare of Roses?
I think it was 2008.
And that was because?
Well, I had always been really full. I never worried about having enough kids to fill it. And from what I recall, and trying to figure it out and talking with other people, it was the time that the housing costs went way up, which today they seem like nothing. And it was as if I had used up all the children in the neighborhoods near me, which was where most of my children came from. So I had some that would come from like Trinidad or Arcata because they'd heard of me and they'd just bring their kids out here. But so I wasn't getting a whole lot more kids. And what I figured out, with talking to people, is, well, young families can't afford to move into those neighborhoods anymore. And so you've used up all those children and nobody with young kids is moving in. So that year was the first year that I was going to open up in, to a new school year. And I went 12 months, I took some vacations throughout the year, but then I was going to open up in September. And always before, the income from the parents' fees had covered all my expenses, paying my teachers, buying supplies, everything it covered. Well, this was going to be the first year that I was going to have to use my savings to run the school. And as things happen in life, the good and the bad of it all, my parents had passed away in that 2007, I think it was 2007. And they had left my siblings and I each, a little chunk of money. And so I felt like, okay, I think I'd been doing it for about 20 years at that point. And running a children's center and doing it well, and I always made sure I did it the best anyone could ever do it. I took care of the children, made sure all their needs were met. I took care of my employees, and I took care of the families. And it's really a big weight to carry on your shoulders, which I didn't really realize it until I wasn't doing it anymore. So then I only had a few kids at that point that I was going to have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to do this anymore. So those children went and found something else, and I took it easy for a little bit of time, for a few months. until I could figure out what else I was going to do to support myself.
That was a ghost of a kid that just
Yeah.
walked in the door. All the kids that ran in and out of this building. I mean, how many do you think that you had coming through this school?
Over the
Total,
years.
yeah. Hundreds.
Over 20 years' time, you figure a few hundred probably.
And now they're all adults.
They are all adults. In fact, one of the little girls who I unfortunately had to disappoint because she, that year that I decided to close, she was actually the granddaughter of a very dear friend of mine. And she, I think, just completed like her 3rd year of college at Santa Cruz. So she was the last one, one of the last kids that were here. So that many years ago.
A legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Humboldt County is in great need of daycare centers. There are still people here having kids, and they don't want to send their child to a center where they're going to be maybe all day or half the day in front of TVs or snotty kids or screaming people or
iPads.
iPads.
These days.
Yeah, and you always emphasis on the exploration of art. I've noticed that, and you brought me into this place to express my artistic endeavors with the kids. I never did any drawing with them or anything, but I feel like the storytelling was the most important thing because there was nothing there except their imaginations and my voice. And sometimes I would draw out a picture, a story on a whiteboard, and that was always fun. And that was something that my great grandmother did. She was a storyteller also, and she did this thing called chalk talk, and it was drawing out pictures and then telling a story as you drew it. And her name was Iseline Glass, and she was from France. And so I started doing that myself without knowing it. And my aunt told me, she says, "Oh, that's what my grandmother did." I'm like, "What?" She goes, "She told stories and drew pictures." And so I was opened up to that spirit of her. And I'm sure those kids that came here.
I remember that now that you are talking about it.
Yeah, and I really feel like the kids got a lot from your teaching them how to express themselves and just how to be freed up from not dittos or here, draw this and color this and stay inside the lines, but there was a bit of freedom that you gave them. And one of your projects that you did often was the mural project. And can you explain that?
So I never considered myself an artist, but I was able to do art with children, and I'd have big bulletin boards in the preschool. I'd have a couple of them, and I'd want to fill them with something, but something beautiful and creative. And so I started doing it. Just kind of was something that just evolved. We usually had a theme, something that we were learning about. Maybe we were learning about the ocean, and so we would do different art projects, making things that you might find in an ocean. And so sometimes I would take, maybe one day we made some jellyfish, another day we made some starfish, and another day maybe we made some seaweed. And so I think, oh, we can put this into one big picture, a mural. And these bulletin boards were probably they were the big, maybe 3 or 4 feet wide by probably 7 or 8 feet long. And so we maybe if it was the ocean, we'd paint the water scene, just put out a big piece of paper, and all the kids would take their turns painting. And so you'd get a beautiful ocean by just putting out several ocean colors. And then maybe you needed a sky in the picture, and so I put another piece out, and we'd paint the sky, and kids would, oh, I'm going to make some clouds, and however 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds make those, and we'd glue those things together and put it up on the big bulletin board, and then take the different projects that we'd done. And sometimes it was we'd get the background up, and then through the week or a couple weeks we would make these different starfish and
And this,
coral and things. And then we'd put it all together to make a scene.
so this would be like a week-long process or 2
You know,
weeks?
sometimes it took a few weeks to do it.
And what were the other themes that you did?
Well, we did dinosaurs. In fact, one of those dinosaur murals, like Sean took a picture of it. We had volcanoes and dinosaurs and prehistoric plants, and that particular mural, I tried to, if the mural could stay together as one piece, I would try to give it to somebody, one of the students, to take home to their family. And a little girl who lives right next door, her parents still live next door to where the preschool was, and she came to the preschool. And actually, that little girl I think she's 30, and she's a teacher, a high school teacher. But I gave it to them because they had a nice big wall to put it on. And so they hung it in their house. And they had it in their house for a while, and then they passed it on to another little boy who loved the dinosaur scene. And then, for some reason, that family couldn't keep it anymore, and so they gave it back to my neighbor, and it's still, that's been 24, 25 or so years ago, that mural is still hanging in my neighbor's, on their landing of their stairs.
Right, and so dinosaurs. Undersea.
Spring, we did flowers, different flower scenes. We did community scenes. We'd paint roads and make cars and buildings and plants. What other ones? Oh, one time we were we were learning about mammals, and we were taking a field trip to the local zoo. And so we made a zoo mural. And each child chose an animal they wanted to do, and they collaged. They did a lot of tearing the paper to make the animals. Looking back at the mural, the picture of the mural, it does look like we did some cutting, but they, with their, these little 3 and 4 year olds, they just collaged and kind of mosaicked construction paper into an animal, and they had a certain square that it was supposed to, sort of fit in that, but they could have arms hanging out if they wanted. And then we took all those squares and we put them together like it was a zoo, cages in the zoo, where all the animals were.
That's great. It created community and diversity and creativity and just this whole flow that would culminate into something that they can all look at together. And it was a group effort in little pieces.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. Now, part of this project that I'm doing these films for is for people of the future to see this, maybe, because it seems like YouTube is the new encyclopedia that people go to for information, and it's all there. I mean, if you want to learn how to fix a washing machine, it's there. If you want to learn how to change a light socket, it's there. If you want to learn how to make a mural out of bits and pieces, it'll be there. And this is also a project about showing how people work. And one of my other questions is, why would you say to somebody else that if it's a good idea to open up a daycare center?
Well, there's a lot more child care that's needed, and quality child care. I am a credentialed teacher, and after my long career working for myself in my own children's center, I did end up in a public school as a credentialed teacher working there. And I say to people, sometimes people ask me about, what I did before and why I quit doing it, and anyway, they ask me a lot of questions about it, and I've always said, when I ran my own children's center, I was in charge of the money, and so we always had everything we needed and everything we wanted. If we wanted something, the kids, had some idea that they wanted to do, I would make sure that I would provide the resources, the toys, the materials for us to do that. When I worked in the public school system, it was worse than pulling teeth to try to get money for what you wanted. Also, I had a whole lot of freedom because it was my school, and people would sometimes ask me, well, what's the philosophy that you follow? And there's things like Montessori and Waldorf and Emilio Reggio, and I would say it's the Judy Rose theory, the Judy Rose philosophy. It's kind of I know about all these different philosophies of education, and I'm quite an alternative education person, and so I've taken a bit from different sources that I've learned about and things that I've done that I really enjoy doing. I always was able to take kids on field trips at least once a month in the summertime, usually 2 or 3 times a month. We would go on field trips. We didn't have to worry about how much it was going to cost to take a bus. So it was you just have a whole lot of freedom when you're doing your own school.
As opposed to running through an agency, because I've worked at many preschools all over California, and some of them are like chains where you went to each one and each one had exact same things in them, and that was really kind of disturbing because the kids didn't look super engaged. They were more just like there, and sometimes I felt bad for them. Not that they felt stuck there, but there was just so many more alternatives that the people that ran these places didn't reach out to seek out these other alternatives. Now they did have me coming in, and that was maybe once or twice, and then they wouldn't hire me back, or just things changed. And I always found that really interesting, how they just didn't see the value in what I was doing, because I feel like I'm pretty freed up in my teaching abilities, and sometimes that would cross a line for somebody, meaning giving the kids way too much freedom to think for themselves and to express themselves, and they had a kind of a chain of command and rules and things that were set up, and I was not part of that little system. And so I took it for what it was, and I enjoyed going to all these schools. What were some of the challenges for you?
The biggest challenge was employees, finding employees, good employees who were willing to learn from me about how I interact with children. And but I did use a lot of, because we're like university, the Humboldt State is nearby. I did use a lot of students, and they were pretty open to what I was doing and willing to learn. But it was hard. I had to make sure I had enough money to pay them, and people tend not to stay long in a job in early childhood education because the pay is low, there aren't benefits. But in using students, that would work out. I would get several students who would, if they would stay with me for 2 years, that was great, and because I was always willing to work with their school schedule. But some of the sometimes like a full-time teacher, that person had to have the correct educational requirements, and those people are fairly hard to find. And again, they aren't being paid what I would like to be able to pay them. And so the turnover in childcare centers tends to be high. Some places you will get people who stay on for years, but typically there's a high turnover for that.
Right.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of planning.
Would it keep you up at night?
Not too often. Not too often. You know, it was fairly flexible in it, in that I had other people working for me. So if I needed to, go to my child's soccer game or take my daughter to her gymnastics, I could do that because I would have people who would work. I think that was the biggest challenge, was just keeping good quality employees. I had great parents. I think over time, as one parent said to me, she said, Judy, you may think that we are checking you out and interviewing you and evaluating you before we send our child here, but we also know that you're doing the same thing to us as parents. And it's true. If someone came along and I could tell right away that this was going to be a difficult relationship, I don't know what I would do, but I rarely had people come that it didn't work out with.
Right. Now, as far as like finding employees, was there periods of time when you hired somebody and you're like, oh, this is not working out? How did you go about passing on that information to them?
That did happen a couple of times. One time, it was the daughter of a very dear and close friend of mine. And I had actually had her other two daughters who had worked for me, who were wonderful and great. Everything worked for her. Actually, my friend had worked for me, but this particular daughter, she was wonderful when she showed up for work, but she often didn't show up. And I finally just had to tell her, I love when you come to work, but you have to come to work. I need you.
Consistently.
The kids need you. And I remember worrying about having to tell her mother that. And I didn't tell her mother ahead of time. Of course, that wouldn't have been a good way to handle it. But afterwards, after I had let this friend's daughter go, I talked with my friend, and she said to me, I'm really glad you did that, because she really respects you. And when I was a kid, I'd known since she was a 4-year-old, and she needed to hear that from you. And so it was fine between myself and my friend that I had let her go. She felt like, well, okay, if Judy Rose tells you this about your work ethic, then maybe you can do something about it.
Very important.
So
hear that from someone that you respect and love.
I'm not one to fret over something. I'm very fair with people, and I know when something's working and when it's not. And I've been in other situations where I had to tell someone, this is just not working for me. It's not working for you, and so it's time for you to find something that works for you.
Yeah, in a nice sing-song manner.
Yeah.
In the sing-song voice of a person working with 3 and 4-year-olds. Did you ever lose it, or lose your focus or concentration or patience?
With employees?
With children?
Children?
Even the slightest bit?
I think everybody does it. Maybe. I have some kids who are big challenges, but I'm really good with those kids. And sometimes I just kind of would have to, you need to go over here.
And I'm going to help you.
Because you're not supposed to be throwing sand in his face,
And your yard had a concrete pad with arrows painted on it so the kids would ride their bikes in the right direction, and a giant sandbox.
2 giant sandboxes.
2 giant sandboxes, and no TV.
No computers.
No computers.
Even when they became available.
What about music?
Oh yeah, we did music. Well, we had you.
Right, but yeah, like tapes and.
But we had dancing
time,
and we had musical instruments, and lots of moving around and going sometimes with the children's ideas. Okay, they wanted to have it's raining out, we're inside too much, they want to have a parade, and we have a big enough place, we march around or we crawl around. Sometimes I remember one day, well, this isn't music, but some of the kids, we would have snack and we had some Cheerios in a bowl, no milk, but just the Cheerios, and they'd start eating them like this, like they were dogs. And I'd say, oh, well, do you want to eat your Cheerios like a dog? Yeah, that'd be fun. And so line up the bowls on the floor and put the Cheerios in. Let everyone get down on their knees and eat their Cheerios like a dog. I don't know what the licensing lady would have thought if she'd happened to stop by that day, but we were just kind of we'd go with the flow. The kids came up with some creative idea. Well, let's try that out.
Very revolutionary. So we're going to finish this interview up with, I kind of go through a sequence of questions: what, who, where, why, when, how, and then I finish it up with whatever. So whatever you want to say to finish up this interview.
Running your own business can be a challenge, and it certainly was a challenge. But when I look back at all the years that I spent doing teaching, and I've done some in the public schools, those were my best years. Was teaching in my own preschool with little children who were full of ideas and imagination, and just enjoyed one another, and it was a really fun, colorful time. And I got a lot of pictures I've taken of the kids, and so I was trying to find some pictures for Sean, and I went through there and went, wow, we did a lot of field trips. We took advantage of whatever was out in the community, like when Natalie, who was the young woman that brought Sean to us, came and said, I've got this person, can we have him come? I was always open to those things. I had a few other visiting people from the community come and do some things with kids, and I just love taking advantage of those resources, because I certainly don't have all those talents and know it all, and the kids just get so much out of that.
Yeah. And some of them will never forget it. There's like little bits and pieces of information in the back of their head. And sometimes I see those kids as adults and I recognize them, and I go up to them and I start talking to them, and then I say, do you remember me? And sometimes it takes a couple minutes of like maybe some clues, little hints, but eventually they get this look in their face like, I do remember you. Oh my God. And I always think that's funny. And so thank you, Judy Rose, for this interview. And how long was it, the Daycare of Roses? From what year to what year?
Let's see. My start with childcare would have been, I think, my son was born in end of 79, so probably about 1981 to about 2008. I think about then. So is that 20 years?
It's a long stretch.
Something close to 20 years. I just know my son was about a year and a half when I started in the family childcare, and I did it. I think 2008 was when I ended up closing. So how many years is that?
I don't know. We have to get out pieces of string and lay them out on the floor and count them. Just like you would have in that time at that school, Daycare of Roses. Thank you, Judy Rose. This is Sean Powers saying, snow day.
Yeah.
Good day.